Before we dive into this story, if you enjoy gripping human versus alien epics, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more HFY adventures, and drop a comment below with what you would have done in Terran's place. Now, let's begin. The storm was still growling when Terran Holt opened his eyes. He wasn't sure if it was the sky or the battlefield making the sound, but either way it didn't matter. The air was thick with the copper tang of blood and burnt polymer, the ground littered with what was left of men, machines, and the things they had fought. Smoke drifted like low clouds over shattered armor plates, and every breath scraped his lungs like broken glass. His helmet's HUD flickered, half dead, flashing error codes over a cracked screen. His squad beacon showed nothing, just static. No green lights. No voices. Just him. He pressed a hand against his ribs and hissed as pain stabbed up his side. A cracked plate. Bruised bones. Not enough to stop him, just enough to make every movement feel like punishment. Still here, he muttered to himself. Lucky me. The sky above was an ugly bruise, acid yellow and ash gray, raining slow sheets of chemical mist that made everything sting. He pushed himself upright and scanned the wreckage. Human bodies. Valari husks. Burnt-out dropships and mechs lying like the bones of extinct animals. They'd called this stretch of terrain No Return Canyon. A joke, they'd said. A stupid one. His radio caught a whisper of distant comms, garbled, faint, like someone shouting from underwater. He ignored it. If Command were alive, they weren't coming for him. If the Valari were, he didn't plan on being found breathing. Terran started moving, one step at a time, boots crunching on glass soil. He scavenged without thinking. Half a ration bar, a cracked stimpack, a knife with a broken tip. He needed direction, water, and something that vaguely resembled a plan. But mostly he needed to not die in the next hour. That was when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to wind or war. A low, wet gasp. He turned sharply, rifle raised. A pile of twisted hull plates lay ahead, and beneath them, movement. He approached carefully, finger brushing the trigger, heart tightening with the instinctive hate that came with the Valari. They were the enemy. Ruthless, methodical, monstrous. They'd burned colonies without blinking. The movement came again. A figure, half buried, glinting under the broken sky. Terran knelt and kicked away the smaller pieces of debris. What lay beneath made the air feel heavier. The armor was unmistakable, curved obsidian plating with silver filigree, ceremonial crest torn and blackened by plasma burns. The body inside was breathing raggedly, blood seeping into the ground like ink. Her chest plate bore the sigil of the Valari royal host. He froze. He'd seen that symbol on every intel briefing. Every mission order. Queen Kareth. Matriarch of the Valari Dominion. The Iron Wing. The one who swore humanity would kneel before her fleets. Her eyes, sharp as a blade, fluttered open, focusing on him through the translator's shimmer. She didn't look afraid. She looked furious to still be alive. Human, her voice rasped through the static, commanding even when barely above a whisper. Do it. And it. Let no scavenger touch me. Terran should have pulled the trigger. Would have been easy, one round, clean. No more wars started by the woman bleeding in the mud at his feet. His finger even brushed the safety. But something cracked open in him instead. It wasn't mercy, not exactly. It was something colder and harder. He'd lost his brother on the edge of a crater just like this, watching a medevac never arrive. No one deserved to die alone in the mud. Not even her. He slung the rifle and dropped to one knee. Her pupils narrowed, more shocked by his refusal to kill her than by her own wounds. Why? She managed. Because I'm not you, he said. He tore open his last medpack, his hand steady despite the shaking in his legs. Human field stims didn't mix with Valari physiology, but he sealed her open gash with polymer gel, pressed gauze to slow the bleeding, and snapped his last pressure injector into her side. Her breathing hitched, then steadied into shallow, stubborn gulps. She tried to push him away. Her hand, more claw than flesh, gripped his wrist. This is madness. Yeah, he muttered, slipping his arm under her. We're pretty good at that. She was heavier than she looked, her armor dense with alien alloys, but he forced her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. Every step jarred his ribs and sent waves of pain up his spine. 30 miles of bad ground lay between here and the fallback line. 30 miles with no backup, no food, no water. And the universe's most dangerous enemy bleeding down his back. The first storm hit 10 minutes later. Acid wind howled through the canyon like a living thing, tearing at his cloak. He adjusted his grip on her weight and pushed forward, boots sinking into sludge. His breath came ragged, loud against the silence of the dead. Behind him, somewhere out in the dark, engines stirred. Patrol drones. Terran cursed under his breath and lowered himself behind a jagged outcrop. He threw his camo cloak over them both, her crest flashing faintly in the dim light. The hum grew louder, passing so close he could feel the vibration in his teeth. He held his breath. She did too. When the sound finally faded, he let it out slowly, forehead pressed against cold stone. Her voice broke the silence, soft but laced with iron. "You're a fool, human." "Yeah," he whispered, dragging himself back to his feet. "But I'm a fool who's not leaving you here." For the first time, her gaze softened. Not much, but enough to register something that wasn't contempt. He didn't need thanks. He didn't even want it. He just started walking again. Far ahead, somewhere beyond the rolling storms, was a half-collapsed relay tower. If he reached it, he might live. If she reached it, the entire war might shift. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, all that mattered was one step and then another. As the rain hissed around them, Terran tightened his grip and muttered into the night, "We both make it out or neither does." And in the darkness, the queen of his enemy leaned against the shoulder of the man who should have let her die. The sky rumbled again. Something had changed. The war was no longer just between armies. It had become personal. And neither of them knew it yet, but the universe would remember this walk. The first hour was nothing but mud and pain. Terran's boots sank into the sludge like the ground itself wanted to hold him back. Each step a battle against exhaustion and the weight of the woman slung over his shoulder. She wasn't light. Her armor was designed for ceremony and war, built from alien alloys heavier than steel. It pulled at his spine, ground his bruised ribs, made every breath burn. The wind sharpened, carrying the scent of ozone and something sweetly rotting. The canyon stretched ahead like a scar, narrow enough to funnel the storm directly down his path. Lightning stitched the bruised sky, white veins flashing against sickly clouds. Every flash threw their shadows against the jagged cliffs, two figures crawling through hell. Behind his visor, Terran's HUD flickered on and off, a failing heartbeat of technology. The compass was dead. The distance counter looped between numbers like a drunk. He could trust nothing except the map burned into his memory, 30 miles through this wasteland to the fallback zone. If he didn't collapse first. The queen stirred against him, a weak shift that nearly made him lose his footing. Her breathing was shallow but steadier now, the medpack buying time she didn't have much of. He glanced down, just enough to see the faint shimmer of her eyes catching the stormlight. "You should have left me," she rasped, her translator still crackling on the lowest setting. "Yeah," Terran said, tightening his grip under her legs. "I get that a lot." Her laugh came out more like a cough. "Humans are illogical." He snorted through clenched teeth. "You're just figuring that out?" Another gust of wind slammed into them, nearly toppling him. He bent forward, planting a boot deep into the sludge for balance. It wasn't just the storm he was fighting. His muscles burned with every movement, old shrapnel scars screaming under the strain. His shoulder armor had cracked hours ago, and now each jolt felt like hot needles digging into raw skin. When the next flash of lightning came, it illuminated three shapes moving across the ridge above them, sleek, spider-like silhouettes. Valari patrol drones. Their long legs clicked against rock, and their sensor beams scanned the canyon below like searching fingers. Terran dropped low behind a half-buried girder, cloak snapping in the wind. The queen's weight pressed against his chest as he slowly lowered them both to the ground. She whispered something in her own language too low for the translator to catch. It sounded like a curse. Her fingers clenched weakly around the edge of his armor. "They will kill you if they find us," she hissed. "I figured," he murmured. His pulse hammered in his ears. The drones swept their beams past the girder. He held his breath, willing his body not to shake. The storm howled, rain stinging the metal like tiny knives. One of the drones paused, sensors rotating toward their hiding place. He reached for the knife at his hip, blunt, chipped, but quiet. The beam lingered, then slid away, following the wind. The drones moved on. Terran exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the inside of his cracked visor. "See? Illogical works sometimes." They stayed low until the sound of metal legs faded into the storm. Then he stood again, slower this time, his knees screaming in protest. She didn't fight him now. Her head rested against his back, the weight of her crown pressing into his armor. She was the most dangerous enemy he'd ever carried, but she was also just a body trying not to die. Hours blurred together, measured only by his footsteps and the storm's endless growl. His ration pack was nearly empty, but he forced a few drops of water into her mouth whenever she stirred. She spat the first time, suspicious. The second time she swallowed. By the third she didn't resist. He tried not to think about how absurd it all was. The war that had chewed through planets, the millions dead, and here he was babysitting its architect through a storm. He'd seen her face on every briefing. They called her the Iron Wing, the queen who burned without blinking. But here she was just another wounded soldier trying to breathe through pain. By the 6th hour, his body began to tremble with exhaustion. His calves cramped with every step, and his breath came in ragged bursts. He reached a ruined transport half buried in a trench and stumbled toward it. The storm's roar dimmed slightly inside the broken hull. He lowered her gently onto the cold metal floor. She hissed as the movement jarred her wounds. Her armor was slick with half-dried blood, her breathing heavy but determined. He slumped beside her, back against the wall, helmet tilted back. "You weigh more than you look." She turned her head weakly toward him. "A queen is not meant to be carried by a soldier." "Yeah, well, I'm not meant to carry alien royalty either. We're both breaking tradition." Her mandible ridges twitched. He'd come to recognize that as a Valari approximation of a smile. "You're kind, always bending the rules. It makes you dangerous." He met her gaze through the dim light. "It keeps us alive." For a long while, there was only the sound of the storm battering the hull. He forced himself to ration the remaining stimpack, pushing the needle into his own thigh. The surge hit like fire in his veins, clearing the fog just enough to keep going. She watched him without blinking, like she was trying to understand why he wasn't leaving her behind. "Why save me?" she asked finally. He stared at the cracked ceiling, the answer as heavy as the silence. "Because someone has to. And there's no one else left." She closed her eyes, the tension in her jaw softening. When the next gust of wind rattled the hull, she didn't flinch. He gave himself 15 minutes. That was all he could afford. Then he forced himself up, joints aching, breath short. He reached down, slid his arms under her again and lifted. His back screamed in protest. She said nothing this time. As they stepped back into the storm, lightning etched their shadows against the canyon walls once more, human and queen, enemies and allies in the same breath. The rain thickened into sheets, erasing the world ahead of him. He kept walking anyway, boots squelching in the muck, each step heavier than the last. Somewhere out there, Valari forces were tightening their perimeter. The fallback zone was still miles away, and he had nothing left but willpower and bad decisions. He adjusted her weight and muttered to himself, "We're not dying out here." Behind him, barely audible over the wind, she whispered something in her native tongue again. This time the translator caught it. "Then walk, human. Walk until the stars burn out." And so he did. Through acid wind, through darkness, through a storm that wanted to swallow them both. Each step wasn't just survival anymore. It was a defiance that neither of them fully understood yet. The night stretched long, but the canyon had not yet beaten him. Not tonight. The storm broke with the dawn. The acid rain thinned into a cold mist that clung to the jagged rocks, softening the world into shades of ash and silver. Terran's legs felt like iron rods hammered into the ground, each step a negotiation with pain. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He'd lost count of how many hours had passed. Time was no longer a line, it was a loop of exhaustion, breath, and stubborn forward motion. When the canyon widened into a field of broken towers, his vision blurred with relief. A derelict outpost lay ahead, half buried in the rubble, its old Terran steel skeleton jutting out like the ribs of some ancient beast. It had once belonged to his people, before the Valari pushed the front line deeper into human territory. He stumbled across the threshold, boots squelching through standing water. The roof had partially collapsed, but a portion of the interior still held shelter. It smelled of rust, rot, and the faint, sour tang of abandoned power cells. A good enough place to not die. Terran lowered the queen onto a slab of cracked flooring, easing her down with care that surprised even him. Her breath rasped like sand dragged across metal. Her color was wrong, too pale for a Valari. The medpack's effects were wearing thin, and he had nothing left to give her. She tilted her head toward him, mandibles tightening against the pain. "This is human construction." "It was," he said, slumping against a wall. "We left it when your people pushed the line past this sector. Guess nobody bothered coming back. Because there was nothing worth taking." Her voice was quiet but steady. He almost laughed at that. "Yeah, sounds about right." Silence settled between them, broken only by the occasional groan of steel shifting under the wind. Terran's chest burned with every breath, his ribs bruised and tight. He peeled off his broken chest plate and let it fall with a dull clang. His undersuit was soaked through, streaked with mud and dried blood. The queen shifted slightly, the movement dragging a pained hiss from her. He knelt beside her and checked the bandages he'd improvised, too loose, too dirty, but better than nothing. She didn't flinch when his fingers brushed the edge of the wound. If anything, she seemed curious. "You could have left me," she said again, softer this time. "You still can." "Yeah," he muttered, pulling his hand back. "But I didn't." Her eyes narrowed, but not in anger. "Do all humans defy logic so easily?" He let out a humorless breath. "Most of us don't live long enough to answer that question." For a moment, something unspoken lingered between them. She wasn't just the face of an empire anymore. Not here, not bleeding on a cold floor with no soldiers or banners. She was just a living thing trying not to break. And somewhere along the line, that had stopped being his problem and become his responsibility. He found a rusted ration crate in the corner. Inside was a single unspoiled water canister, miracle wrapped in metal. He cracked the seal and lifted it toward her mouth. She hesitated, then drank, her movements slow and deliberate. The sharp scent of Valari breath filled the air, metallic, almost floral. Terran took a swig himself, letting the water slide down like fire. It wasn't enough to ease the fatigue clawing at his bones, but it bought him a few more minutes of clarity. She watched him with that sharp alien gaze. "When I was a hatchling, we were told humans were reckless. That you'd burn your own worlds before you ever bowed." "Accurate," he said. "I thought it was meant to frighten us," she continued. "Now I think it was a warning." He almost smiled. "We're good at warnings." The words hung between them, fragile but real. Then the distant hum reached them. A rising vibration that made the metal floor shiver. Terran's heart lurched. Valari Recovery Unit. He recognized the sound from too many close calls. She turned her head toward the entrance, mandibles tightening. "They are mine." "Yeah," he said, reaching for his rifle, "and they'll kill me anyway." "You must leave," she snapped. Her voice carried more strength now, the command of a queen flickering beneath the pain. "Not happening," he shot back. She stared at him for a long, unreadable second. "You are a fool. I've been called worse." The sound grew louder. Engines. Boots on stone. A searchlight cut through the mist outside. Terran pulled himself to his feet, shouldering his half-broken rifle. He crouched near the doorway, pulse pounding hard enough to drown out the storm. The queen tried to push herself upright, but her body betrayed her. The first Valari scout swept in through the jagged frame of the door, tall, lean, wrapped in dark armor that caught the weak light. Terran moved before it could adjust. A clean, low shot cracked through the outpost. The scout dropped without a sound. Another followed. This one wasn't as lucky. Terran's rifle jammed halfway through the burst. The Valari lunged forward, blade gleaming like liquid glass. Terran ducked under the swing and slammed his shoulder into the alien's chest, driving it back into the wall. They grappled in the dark, his strength against its precision, and for a moment, the outcome could have gone either way. Then the queen's voice rang out, sharp, commanding. A single Valari word, low and guttural. The scout froze, blade hovering inches from Terran's throat. Its multifaceted eyes flicked between its queen and the human beneath its grip. Confusion cracked through its rigid stance. Terran didn't waste the moment. He twisted the blade free and drove it up through the soft seam under the alien's chin. The scout collapsed, the weapon clattering to the floor. He turned toward her. Her breathing was harsh, but her gaze burned with something unfamiliar. Not hatred. Not contempt. Recognition. "You fight like a beast," she said, voice low. He wiped blood from his jaw with the back of his glove. "We're good at that too." More sounds echoed from the ridge outside, reinforcements. A dozen, maybe more. His chances were shrinking fast. She shifted, summoning strength from somewhere deep. "They will not harm me. If they find me alive, I can command them. But if they find you—" "Yeah," he said, dragging a broken crate toward the doorway for cover. "I know." He wasn't sure why he was still standing there, bleeding and exhausted, defending someone who'd spent her life trying to wipe out his kind. Maybe it was pride. Maybe something worse. But it was real, and it anchored him more than any order ever had. The distant footsteps grew louder, closing in. He met her gaze through the gloom. "Then we'd better make sure they find their queen on her feet," he said. Something flickered across her face, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. But when she pushed herself up with his help, the air between them shifted. She wasn't just a burden anymore. She was standing beside him. Outside, the mist thickened. The hunt was closing in. Inside, a human and a queen stood shoulder to shoulder, united not by loyalty or trust, but by the simple, stubborn fact that neither of them was ready to die. The first beam of light sliced through the darkness, and Terran's finger tightened on the trigger. The real fight had just begun. Terran woke to a ceiling that gleamed like polished bone. The light was too bright, the air too clean, and the bed beneath him too soft to belong anywhere near a battlefield. His pulse spiked as he jerked upright, ignoring the stab of pain that tore through his shoulder. The room wasn't human. The walls curved with an alien elegance, each surface pulsing faintly with a bioluminescent glow. Valari architecture. A figure moved at the edge of his blurred vision, stepping forward with a soft rustle of fabric and armor. Queen Kareth. She wasn't half dead anymore. Her wounds had healed with a speed that made human medicine look primitive. She stood tall, spine straight, every inch the ruler whose image had haunted Terran war briefings for years. But her gaze when it met his wasn't the cold, distant stare of a conqueror. It was focused, deliberate, and unsettlingly calm. "You live," she said. The translator gave her voice that strange metallic undertone he'd grown used to. "Yeah," Terran rasped, rubbing a hand over his face. "Much to everyone's disappointment, I'm sure." "You should not be capable of sarcasm after 3 surgeries," she replied, and though her face remained expressionless, there was something almost dry in her tone. "But you are human. It seems inevitable." He scanned the room again. No restraints. No guards in sight. But the silence pressed down like weight. "Where am I?" "In the Valari capital spire," she said. "My personal chamber of healing." His throat went dry. That wasn't just enemy territory. That was the heart of their empire. "Then why am I still breathing?" "Because I willed it," she answered without hesitation. "Your survival is mine to protect now." He barked out a laugh that wasn't entirely steady. "I carried you through a war zone. That doesn't exactly make me your pet soldier." Her mandibles tightened, not in anger but in some private calculation. "No. But it binds me to you. By our law, a life carried through death must be honored. You are under the Queen's protection." The door slid open and the weight of the moment snapped into something sharper. A dozen Valari counselors filed in, their armor shining, their faces carved in rigid disdain. Their language filled the room like a blade drawn from its sheath. He couldn't understand the words but the tone was clear. They wanted him dead. Kareth raised one hand, silencing them with a gesture. She switched to the translator. "They believe your existence here is an insult. They would rather see your body on a pike than under my protection." "Hard to argue with them," Terran said dryly. She ignored the jab. "They speak of honor. But honor binds me as well. You carried me through 30 miles of death. You killed my hunters. You stood at my side when they came for me. A queen does not discard such debts." The tallest of the counselors stepped forward, his voice sharp and cold. He spoke directly to her, his eyes never flicking toward Terran. She listened, unmoving, until his words cut off like a knife through rope. Then she turned to Terran. "They demand I give you to them," she said. "A gift to cleanse their pride." "Generous offer," Terran muttered, pulse pounding. "I'd rather decline." For the first time he saw her temper surface, not the blazing rage of a tyrant, but the steady, simmering kind that made her terrifying. She straightened, her crest catching the light, and when she spoke, her voice carried like thunder wrapped in silk. "Then I will decline for you." The room shifted. The counselors recoiled as if she'd swung a blade at them. One shouted back, another hissed through clenched mandibles. The air thickened with something old and dangerous. Terran watched the exchange without fully grasping the words, but he didn't need to. Power was a language he understood well enough. She was holding the line between him and a dozen people who would rather see his skull split open. And she wasn't flinching. The counselors finally withdrew, their exit like a collective threat that didn't need to be spoken. When the last one was gone, the room was quiet again, save for the faint hum of alien machines. "Why?" Terran asked after a long silence. "You could have handed me over. No one would have questioned it." She tilted her head slightly. "Because I am not a coward. And because the Empire needs to learn that mercy is not weakness." He stared at her, searching for the trick, the hidden blade behind the words. But there was only iron conviction. And something else he hadn't expected, respect. "Your war and mine are not over," she said softly. "But it has changed. You have changed it." The room's glow dimmed as the day outside bled into night. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint scars left on her armor, the marks of the place where he had dragged her out of the wreckage. "I will not let them kill you," she continued. "Not while my word still binds this empire. But you are not a prisoner. You will walk at my side as my bodyguard." The first human ever to stand in a Valari throne room without chains. He almost laughed again but the sound caught in his throat. "That's one hell of a job offer." "It is not a request," she said. Her voice was firm but not cruel. "It is a promise. If you accept, you will live. If you refuse, the council will find other ways to make you disappear. My protection has limits. My reach, however, does not." He leaned back, feeling the ache settle deep into his bones. It was madness. All of it. He should have died in that canyon. Instead, he was standing at the edge of something far bigger than himself. "Fine," he said. "I'll stand next to your throne. But don't expect me to bow." A flicker of something, amusement maybe, passed across her face. "I would expect nothing less." The door slid shut behind her as she left, the echo of her steps fading into the alien corridors. Terran lay back against the smooth wall, the reality of it crashing down like the first shell of a bombardment. He had gone from a dying soldier to the Queen's shield, standing in the heart of the empire that had burned his people. Somewhere in the darkness beyond this room, the council was already sharpening their knives. She had protected him today, but he knew the weight of a promise like that. It wouldn't hold forever. Still, when he closed his eyes, the memory of her standing between him and a room full of enemies wouldn't leave. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't trust. It was a line drawn in blood, and for now she was on his side of it. The war outside still raged. But something deeper had already shifted. The throne chamber was a cathedral of light and shadow, towering high above the Valari capital like the crown of a living god. Transparent walls pulsed with veins of silver luminescence, revealing a city that spiraled endlessly below. Armored guards stood in disciplined silence, their weapons angled like fangs. At the center of it all, upon a dais of obsidian and bone, sat Queen Kareth. Her posture was flawless, regal, but her gaze burned with something sharper than protocol. Terran stood just behind and to her right, close enough to hear the slow, measured rhythm of her breathing. His uniform was no longer the shredded battlefield fabric it had once been. The Valari had fitted him with armor, half Terran, half alien. Black plates reinforced with Valari carapace, scarred at the edges where it met the scars on his own body. He didn't look like a prisoner. He looked like something else entirely. The council chamber doors slid open with a hiss. 12 counselors entered in formation, their ceremonial armor gleaming like blades. The air itself seemed to tighten around their arrival. No one spoke. No one needed to. The scent of coming blood hung heavy. Kareth rose from her throne, and the movement was enough to silence every rustle. "We will not circle this matter any longer," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber like a sharpened spear. "Tonight, we decide the future of this empire." The eldest counselor stepped forward, his crest arched high in challenge. "Then end it, Kareth. This human does not belong in our court. You dishonor the line of queens by sheltering him." Terran felt every gaze shift toward him like a firing squad aligning their aim. He didn't flinch. He'd faced worse than stares. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was politics. And politics could cut deeper than any blade. Kareth descended the steps slowly, deliberately. "You speak of dishonor," she said. "But you stood by while your fleets abandoned their own soldiers at Alaris Gorge. You called it necessary sacrifice. I call that cowardice." A hiss rippled through the room. One of the counselors slammed a clawed hand against his chest plate. "We did what was required for the survival of our kind. And yet a single human did more for me than my entire guard," she said, stopping at the center of the chamber. "He carried me through fire and death when your warriors turned their backs. I am alive because of him. Our enemies still fear us because he refused to let their blades end me. You question my judgment? Then you question the survival of your own throne." The counselor's mandibles clicked in fury. "He is an alien. A soldier of a people that has spilled Valari blood for decades. No human can be trusted." "Then trust me," she answered, voice low, dangerous. "Trust your queen." Terran's hand hovered near the hilt of the Valari-forged blade at his hip. He didn't plan to use it, not yet. But he knew the council was pushing toward something irreversible. A line was about to be crossed. A counselor turned suddenly, addressing the room in Valari tongue, his voice rising. Others joined in, their tone mounting like a storm. Terran couldn't understand every word, but the rhythm was obvious. Trial, vote, execution. Then Kareth raised her hand, and the chamber fell to silence. "Very well," she said. "If you doubt his place here, then we will settle it as the law allows." Terran tensed. "What law?" Her gaze flicked to him, calm, unwavering. "The law of blades," she said. "A single combat witnessed by the council. If you fall, their claim stands. If you survive, your place as my protector is unquestionable." His pulse pounded in his ears. You're throwing me into a fight to the death to prove a political point? She stepped closer, her voice soft enough only he could hear. I'm giving you a chance to choose your own fate. And I am trusting you to make them bleed. The crowd parted as the chosen champion approached, a Valari warlord wrapped in obsidian armor, twice Terran's height and built like a siege engine. His eyes glimmered with the thrill of blood sport. His name was hissed through the chamber, Varkle. He was a legend among their warriors. Terran drew in a slow breath. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to run, to find another way. But that wasn't who he was. He had carried her through 30 miles of death. He had stood between her and a firing squad of her own people. He would not break here. The ring formed quickly, counselors stepping back to give the combatants space. No shields, no armor augmentations beyond what they wore. One blade each. Varkle moved first, fast. A sweeping slash cut through the air where Terran's head had been a second earlier. He ducked low, rolling to the side, his muscles screaming in protest. The alien was stronger. Far stronger. But strength wasn't everything. Terran pivoted and slashed upward, steel meeting carapace with a ringing crack. Varkle staggered half a step, more surprised than wounded. Then he roared and came at him like an avalanche. The duel blurred into heat and motion. Sparks flew. Blades shrieked. Terran's lungs burned, sweat stinging his eyes, but his focus never wavered. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for the thin thread that held this fragile alliance together. A blow caught him across the ribs, sending him sprawling. Pain flared white-hot. Varkle lunged for the killing strike. Terran twisted at the last second, the blade carving into the floor instead of his chest. He surged upward, driving his knee into the Valari's midsection. The giant reeled. Not enough. Karetha's voice cut through the noise. Stand, human. He dragged himself to his feet, blood soaking through the edges of his armor. Varkle charged again, but this time Terran didn't back away. He met him head-on, slipping just inside the arc of the alien's swing, and drove his blade between the plates of the warlord's chest armor. The sound was wet and final. Varkle froze, breath rattling out like wind through a broken gate. Terran yanked the blade free as the giant collapsed to the polished floor, crimson pooling beneath him. The silence that followed was absolute. Kareth stepped forward, her crest high, her voice ringing with the authority of a ruler whose word was law. You have your answer. No one challenged her. No one dared. Terran stood in the center of the ring, chest heaving, blood staining his hands and armor. He'd faced death again, and this time he hadn't just survived, he'd claimed his place. The queen approached him, stopping inches away. Now, she said softly, they will learn that what walks beside me is not a pet. It is a force. For the first time the council bowed. Not to her. To both of them. Terran met her gaze, exhaustion and grim satisfaction intertwining in his chest. The war wasn't over. The politics weren't done. But this moment, this single brutal stand, had carved a line in history. She extended her hand. Walk with me, Guardian. He didn't hesitate. Their footsteps echoed together as they left the chamber behind. And though the world outside still hung in the balance, one truth had settled into every watching heart. The throne had found its shield. And the empire would never be the same again.